Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk to you all about the concept of scaffolding, which is the process in which teachers model or demonstrate how to solve a problem in a very stepwise process. First, by breaking it into smaller chunks and working with students, and then gradually stepping back and offering support as needed. The purpose of scaffolding is to give students more ownership of their work and, over time, decreasing their reliance on the teacher. In my opinion, the three essential components of scaffolding, the three things that make up the definition of scaffolding are teacher modeling and teacher demonstration as the first step. The second step being breaking it down into chunks and having the students play through whatever it is you're doing in chunks. And then lastly, putting these smaller chunks into the context of the piece you're working on or the song you're singing. The term scaffolding was first used in the 1960s by Jerome Brunner, and he talked about it, or he described it as when students learn new concepts, they're dependent on adult support when they first learn a new concept. And as they become independent, the more support they gain, they slowly become independent. And when they become independent, then the support can gradually fade off. So that is how Brunner first described scaffolding in the 1960s. And scaffolding was also part of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which I'm sure you all have heard plenty about. So next I'm going to show you all an example of how I have used scaffolding in my classroom. So take this piece, for example, which we're all familiar with, hot cross buns. It's 4 measures. A way that I would present this to my students is I would ask them just to look at the piece and say 3 out of the 4 measures are exactly the same and one of them is different. Can anybody tell me which measure, using 1, 2, 3, or 4, which measure number is different just by looking at it? And they wouldn't even have to be able to read music to be able to see that, because all you have to do is see the shape of the moving line. So hopefully they would all answer 3. And if they did, then the next thing we would do is I would have them pick between a bunch of shapes. So a star, a square, a triangle, a circle, and a smiley face are the ones that I use. And I would tell them to write the same shape over measures 1, 2, and 4, and write a different shape over 3 to reinforce in their heads that measure 3 is different than measure 1, 2, and 4, and that measure 1, 2, and 4 are all identical to each other. And once they do that, I would then start the scaffolding process by modeling measure 1, and then telling them, if you can play these 3 notes, you can play 3/4 of the song correctly. So we don't need to chunk measure 2 and measure 4 because they're the same as measure 1. After I model measure 1, then I would model measure 3 because that's the only one that's different than the rest. So first I would play it on my recorder or whatever band instrument, and then I would have them play it with me. So we would all play G, 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 A. And once they're very comfortable rhythmically with measure 3 and with the notes, then we would put it into the context of the whole piece, and we would play through hot cross buns from beginning to end. And after we did that once, then I would not play with them. So then that would be the last step of scaffolding, fostering student independence. So after I've modeled for them, broke it into chunks, played it with them in chunks, and then put it into the context of the whole song while playing it with them, the last thing is for me to back off and to let them take the reins and do it without me playing with them. So I came up with a few real-world examples of scaffolding that don't have to do with music. So learning to tie your shoes very much embodies the steps of scaffolding. I'm sure a lot of you that may have young children, or if you don't, maybe you remember learning to tie your shoes. I'm sure that at one point your parents just said, hey, look at my feet, I'm going to show you how to tie my shoes. So that's the modeling and demonstration point of it. And they probably did it from beginning to end and just had you observe and watch and do nothing else. And then after that, there's a good chance that they took a part of it, not the whole thing, and had you do it with them repeatedly over and over again. So my parents, it was the take the one string around the loop-de-loop and pull. So loop-de-loop and pull, loop-de-loop and pull. So that was, for me, that was, I still remember it today, that was the breaking it down into chunks, was loop-de-loop and pull. And we worked on that together. My mom would do it by herself, and then she would grab my hands and have me do it over and over again until I was really comfortable with it. And then I did it by myself 3 times perfectly before we put it into the context of the whole process of tying your shoes. So loop-de-loop and pull 3 times, and then, okay, let's go back to the beginning. Now we have 2 strings, go across, tie, then loop-de-loop and pull. And of course, once I got that down, then the parents back off and you try it on your own independently. So that is the concept of tying your shoes as it relates to scaffolding. So another one that I thought of is learning to ride a bike. So this one might not be quite as prevalent as tying your shoes, but it's also quite likely that when you learn to ride a bike, before you learn, that you watched somebody else do it and you observed how their legs were moving and what they were doing with their arms to balance. And some of you may have learned to ride your bike by first having your parents hover over and hold on to the handrails and then gradually back off, just as Bruner says. The support can be gradually faded over time. So another way that's learning to ride your bike, perhaps if your parents didn't grab onto the handrails, another way is the use of training wheels. So this is very indirectly related to chunking, but I think it kind of is related to chunking, because if you practice riding a bike with training wheels, then you are specifically focusing on the skill of leg movements and steering. You're not focusing on balancing, because you don't need to worry about balancing on a bike when you have training wheels. So the training wheels facilitate chunking by letting you focus in specifically on how you move your legs and how you turn the steering wheel to help you ride a bike. And then once you have that down, then slowly, well, I guess not slowly, suddenly you or your parents take the training wheels off, and then you put both skills together. The skill that you have isolated and worked on individually of moving your legs and moving the handlebars, and then combining that with the new skill that you now have to master, because you don't have the training wheels on anymore, of balancing. So my activity challenge to you all is to come up with another real-world example of scaffolding, something other than learning to tie your shoes or learning to ride a bike. Maybe something else outside the music classroom or even outside education in general that incorporates the use of modeling, followed by the use of breaking it down into small chunks, and finally followed by putting it into context and the teacher or parent or facilitator slowly backing off to foster student or child independence. And that is all for us. So I hope you guys have a great Monday evening, and I look forward to seeing everybody else's presentation.